Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from Group C, and we will present our discussion about principles of teaching reading. And the group members are me, Ayunida, Ilma, Nafia, Farel, Pahleviputra, Arifin, Yulinda, Rahma, Listya, Ariyani, Nada, Adelia, Dewi, and Fadila Amanda. And for the first explanation will be presented by me. Okay, this is research on reading in a second language. The first one is bottom-up and top-down processing. Reading specialists might have argued that the best way to teach reading is through bottom-up methodology. Teach symbols, grapheme, phoneme correspondences, syllables, and lexical recognition first, then comprehension would be derived from the sum of the part. And the second one is schema theory and background knowledge. From Nasaji, provided an alternative view of the role of background knowledge, appealing to connectionist models of memory. In Nasaji's view, background knowledge is not pre-stored, but rather it emerges in the context of the task and is relatively unstructured as opposed to the highly structured knowledge representation suggested by schema theory. In this construction integration model, the learner is seen to play a more active role in constructing meaning, while reading then is proposed by schema theory. The third one is teaching strategic reading. One of the questions that have been asked about teaching reading has been the extent to which learner will learn to read better in a atmosphere of enriched surroundings than in an instructed sequence of direct attention to the strategies of efficient reading. The next one is extensive reading. For academic purposes, extensive reading is a key to students' gains in reading ability, linguistic competence, vocabulary, spelling, and writing. The next one is reading rate, fluency, and automaticity. From Anderson, further notes that fluency is a combination of both reading rate and reading comprehension. He goes on to suggest strategies of skimming, scanning, predicting, and identifying main ideas as approaches to increasing fluency, or what might also be described as automaticity. The next one is focus on vocabulary. The next one is the role of affect and culture, and the last one is second language literacy. What are sometimes referred to as skill-based bottom-up and strategies-based or top-down approaches are both used in adult literacy training. For the next slide will be presented by Farel Pahlevi.
Okay, thank you, Ayun. I will continue the presentation from Ayunida. Here, I will explain about the genres and characteristics of written language. The first one is genres of written language. In our highly literate society, there are literally hundreds of different types of written text, a much larger variety than found in the spoken text. Each of the types listed below represents or is an example of a genre of written language. Each has certain rules or convention for its manifestation, and we are thus able immediately to identify a genre and to know what to look for within the text. Consider the following non-exhaustive list. This is a list of genre of written language. Nonfiction, such as reports, editorials, essays, articles, reference. Fictions are novels, short stories, jokes, drama, and poetry. Letters as personal, business. Electronic, such as emails, tweets, blogs, posts. Greeting cards, diaries, memos, message, announcement, newspaper, academic writing such as short answer test responses, reports and papers, books, forms or applications, questionnaires, directions, labels, signs, recipes, bills, maps, manuals, menus, schedules as transportation tables, advertisement, invitation, directories, and comic strips. Okay, next slide, please. When you encounter of the above, you usually know what your purpose is in rating it, and therefore you know what to select and what not to select for short and long-term memory. In other words, you bring various schemata to bear on the message that you have chosen to retain. Okay, the next material is about characteristic of written language. There are quite a number of salient and relevant differences between spoken and written language. Students already literate in their native language will of course be familiar with the broad, basic characteristic of written language. However, some characteristic of English writing, especially certain rhetorical conventions, may be so different from the students. Information listed below will also be of some help for you in doing the following. Specific objectives, and the last is reminding students of some of advantages of written language over spoken. Here is the types of characteristic of written language. Number one is permanence. Spoken language is fleeting. Once you speak a sentence, it vanishes or unless there is a tape recorder around. The hearer, therefore, is called upon to make immediately perceptions and immediate storage. Written language is a permanent or as permanent as paper and computer files. Therefore, the reader has an opportunity to return again and again, if necessary, to a word or phrase or sentence or even a whole text. Number two is processing time. Many reading contexts allow readers to read at their own rate, especially reading for pleasure. They aren't forced into following the rate of delivery, as in spoken language, and so somewhat slower readers are not always at a disadvantage, especially when they are in complete control of amount of time needed to read a text. Teachers are therefore called on to help learners to achieve a fluency rate that will enable them to function adequately within their various contexts. Classroom lessons in reading must account for those contexts and place appropriate emphasis or whatever optimal reading rates are deemed necessary. Number three is distance. The written word allows messages to be sent across two dimensions. The first is physical distance and temporal distance. The pedagogical significance of this fact centers on interpretation. The task of the reader is to interpret language that was written in some other place at some other time with only the time written words themselves as contextual clues. Number 4 is orthography. In spoken language, most languages have phonemes, stress, rhythm, juncture, intonation, pauses, volumes, voice quality settings, and nonverbal cues, all of which enhance the message. In writing, we have graphemes. Yes, sometimes punctuations, pictures, graphics, or charts lend a helping hand. And yes, a writer can describe the aforementioned phonological cues as in with loud, rasping grunts punctuated by roars of pain. Number 5 is complexity. You might be tempted to say that writing is more complex than speech, but in reality, that would be difficult to demonstrate. Writing and speech represent different modes of complexity, and the most salient difference is in the nature of clauses. Look at the following pair. A. Because of the frequent ambiguity that therefore is present in a good deal of writing, readers must do their best to infer, to interpret, and to read between the lines. B. There is a frequent ambiguity in a lot of writing, and so readers have to infer a lot. They also have to interpret what they read, and sometimes they have to read between the lines. Okay, number 6 is vocabulary. It is true that written English typically utilize a greater variety of lexical items than spoken conversational English. In our everyday give and take with family, friends, colleagues, vocabulary is limited. Because writing allows the reader more processing time because of a desire to be precise in writing and simply because of the formal convention of writing. However, because the meaning of a good many unknown words can be predicted from their context, and because sometimes the overall meaning of a sentence or paragraph is nevertheless still clear, learners should retrain from the frequent use of a bilingual dictionary. And then the last is formality. Reading is quite frequently more formal than speech. What do we mean by that? Formality refers to prescribed forms that certain written message must adhere to. The reason that you can both recognize a menu and decide whether it fairly quickly is that menus conform to certain conventions. We have rhetorical or organizational formality in essay writing that demands a writer's conformity to conventions like paragraph topics. There is usually a logical order for, say, comparing and contrasting something, opening and closing an essay, and a preference from non-redundancy and subordination of clauses and more. Until a reader is familiar with the formal features of a written text, some difficulty in interpretation may ensue. Okay, the next presentation will be explained by Yulinda.
Okay, thank you, Farel. The next one is micro skills for reading comprehension. For micro skills, the first one is discriminate among the distinctive graphemes and orthographic patterns of English. The next one is retain chunks of language of different lengths in short-term memory. The third one is comprehend written language at an efficient rate of speed to suit the purpose. The next one is recognize a core of words and interpret word order patterns and their significance. The next one is recognize grammatical word classes, systems, pattern, rules, and elliptical form. The next one is recognize that the particular meaning may be expressed in a different grammatical form. The next slide, please. For macro skill, the first one is recognize cohesive device in written discourse and their role in signaling the relationship between and among clauses. The next one is recognize the theoretical forms of written discourse and their significance for interpretation. The next one is recognize the communicative function of written text according to form and purposes. The next one is infer context that is not explicit by using background knowledge. The next one is infer links and connection between events, ideas, and etc. Deduce cause and effects and detect such relation as a main idea, supporting idea and new information, pivot information, generalization, and exemplification. The next one is distinguish between literal and implied meaning. The next one is detect culturality, specific reference, and interpret them in a context of the appropriate cultural schemata. The last one from macro skill is develop and use a battery of reading strategies such as scanning and skimming, detecting discourse markers, tracing the meaning of word from context, and activating schemata for the interpretation of text. Next slide. For the next material is strategies for reading comprehension. The first one is identify the purpose in reading. This is to connect the ideas on the edge to what you have already know. The second one is the use graph comic rules and patterns to aid in a bottom-up decoding, especially for beginning level learners. At the beginning level of learning English, one of the difficulties students encounter in learning to read is making the correspondence between spoken and written English. Next slide. The next one is use efficient silent reading techniques for improving fluency. These are few silent reading rules. The first one is you don't need to pronounce each word to yourself. The second one is try to visually perceive more than one word at a time, preferably phrases. The third one is unless a word is absolutely crucial to global understanding, skip over it and try to infer its meaning from its context. The next one is skim the text for main ideas. Skimming consists of quickly running one's eyes across a whole text, such as an essay, article, and chapter. Skimming gives reader the advantage of being able to predict the purposes of the passage, the main topic or message, and possibly some of the developing or supporting idea. Next slide. The next one is scan the text for specific information. Scanning or quickly searching for some particular piece or pieces of information in a text. Scanning exercise may ask students to look for names or dates to find the definition or key concept or to list a certain number of supporting detail. The next one is use semantic mapping or clustering. Readers can easily be overwhelmed by long string of ideas or events. The strategy of semantic mapping or grouping ideas into meaningful clusters help the reader to provide some order to the chaos. The next one is guessing when you are not certain. To avoid the learners to become haphazard readers, they utilize all their skills to put forth as much effort as possible to be on target with their hypothesis. Next slide. The next slide is analyze vocabulary. This is some guidelines for helping learners to employ word analysis techniques. Look for the prefix that may give a clue. Look for the suffix that might indicate what part of speech it is. Look for the roots that are familiar, and look for the grammatical context that may signal information. And the last one is look at the semantic context for clues. Next slide. The next slide is distinguish between literal and implied meanings. The literal meanings of a sign is what it denotes, while the implied meaning is what the sign connotes. These meanings, particularly the implied meanings, require the interpreter of sign and creator of sign to share the same context if the meaning is to be interpreted correctly. The next is capitalize on discourse marker to process relationship. Many discourse maker in English signal relationship among ideas as expressed through phrase, clause, and sentence. A clear comprehension of such marker can greatly enhance learner reading efficiency. The next slide. The next slide will be presented by Adele.
Okay, thank you, Yulinda. Next is types of classroom performance. There are mind mapping, classroom reading performance. The, there are oral and silent. The silent, there are intensive and extensive reading. In intensive reading, there are linguistics and content. In extensive, there are skimming, scanning, and global. Oral and silent reading. At the beginning and intermediate levels, oral reading provides some advantages as well as disadvantages. Advantages is oral reading serves as an evaluative check on bottom-up processing skills. Then it doubles as pronunciation check. Next is it adds some extra student participation if you want to highlight a certain short segment of a reading passage. And disadvantages is oral reading is not a very authentic language activity. Second, while one student is reading, other can easily lose attention, or if they are reading, it turns a be silently rehearsing the next paragraph. Third, it may have the outward appearance of student participation when in reality it is mere recitation. For advanced level, usually only advantages number 3 can be gained by reading orally. As a rule of thumb, you want to use oral reading to serve at least one of the above purpose. On the other hand, advantages of too much oral reading also need to be considered when asking students to read aloud. Okay, the next please. Silent reading, on the other hand, is essential in order for learners to gain any speed in the process. For extensive reading explained below, speed is usually an important factor. For intensive reading, learning to read silently may be of less importance, but still remains an ultimate goal. Second one is an intensive and extensive reading. Intensive reading is usually a classroom-oriented activity in which students focus on the linguistic or semantic details of a passage. Intensive reading often calls students' attention to grammatical forms, discourse markers, and other surface structure details for the purpose of understanding literal meaning, implication, re- rhetorical relationship, and like. Well, extensive reading is carried out to achieve a general understanding of a usually somewhat longer text, for example, books, long articles, essays. Most extensive reading is performed outside class time, leisure, Reading is often extensive, technical, scientific, and professional. Reading can, under certain special circumstances, be extensive when one is striving for global or general meaning from longer passages. Next. Okay, the next is principle for teaching reading. Number one, in an integrated course include a focus on reading skills. Also learners, while literate in their own language, are sometimes left to their own devices when it comes to learning reading skills. It's easy for teachers to assume that our students will learn good reading simply by absorption through generous offerings of both intensive and extensive reading opportunities. In reality, there is much to be gained by a strategic focus on reading skills, reading lessons that cover other skills. Virtually all course materials include written words, so students are reading even if their reading is incidental to other tasks. But even in those incidental reading moments, you can inject focal moments in which students attend to reading. Number two, offer reading or relevant, interesting, motivating topics. Through generous offering of both intensive and extensive reading opportunities, in reality, there is much to be gained by a strategic focus on reading skill with lessons that cover other skill. Virtually course material include the written words so students are reading, even if their reading is incidental to other tasks. But even in this incidental reading moments, you can inject vocal moment with students to attend to reading. Number three, number three, balance authenticity in readability in choosing text. Nuttall, 1996, offered three criteria for choosing reading text for students. First, suitability of content, material that students will find interesting, enjoyable, challenging, and appropriate from their goals in learning English. Second, exploitability, a text that facilitates the achievement of certain language and content goals that is exploitable for instructional tasks and techniques, and that is integratable with other skills, listening, speaking, reading. Third, readability, a text with lexical and structural difficulty that will challenge students without overwhelming them. Next, please. Fourth, number four, encourage the development of reading strategies. Number five, include both bottom-up and bottom-down techniques. Number six, follow the SQ3R. SQ3R process is survey, skim the text for an overview of main ideas. Question, the reader asks questions about what he or she wishes to get out of the text. Read. Read the text while looking for answers to previously formulated questions. Proceed. Reprocess the silent points of the text through oral or written language, and then review. assess the importance of what one has just read and incorporate to it incorporate it into long-term associations. Next slide, please. Number 7, design pre-reading while reading and post-reading phase. There are tips for teaching reading. Number 1, before you read, spend some time introducing a topic, encouraging skimming, scanning, predicting, and activating schemata. Students can bring the best of their knowledge and skills to a text when they have been given a chance to ease into the passage. Number 2, while you read, not all reading is simply extensive or global reading. There may be certain facts or rhetorical devices that students should take note of while they read. Give students a sense of purpose for reading rather than just reading because you ordered it. Number 3, after you read, comprehension questions are just one form of activity appropriate for post-reading. Also consider vocabulary study, identifying the author's purpose, discussing the author's line of reasoning, examining grammatical structure, or steering students toward a follow-up reading exercise. Next slide, please. Number 8, build ongoing informal assessment into your techniques of response that indicate comprehension. Number 1, doing. The reader responds physically to a comment. Number 2, choosing. The reader select from alternative posts orally or in writing. Number 3, transferring. The reader summarize orally what is read. Number 4, answering. The reader answer question about the passage. Number 5, condensing. The reader outlines or take notes on a passage. Number 6, extending. The reader provides an ending to a story. Number 7, duplicating. The reader translates the message into the native language or copies it. Beginning level for very short passages only. Number 8, modeling. The reader puts together a toy, for example, after reading direction for assembly. Number 9, conversing. The reader engages in a conversation that indicates appropriate processing of information. Next slide. Okay, the next slide will be presented by Fadila Amanda.
Okay, thank you, Adele. Next, to reading lesson. To reading are an activity in which the teacher displays the different reading texts. We see the example. For the beginning level, the lesson gives a pre-reading focus on vocabulary, then while reading guessing word meaning from context, followed by post-reading exercise on inference, not taking any discussion. This is part of a general skills textbook. For students at a high intermediate level preparing for academic reading in English. The topics is laughter and the brain and objective focus on main idea, connotation, names, discussionary, use, note taking, and critical thinking, among others. The genre features writing in a magazine or newspaper manifest more complexity in discourse structure, vocabulary, and cognition than the first lesson. A number of the principles and strategies cited in this chapter are included. Notice especially the exercise on critical thinking, which requires inference and creativity. Next slide. Assessing. Reading assessment in this context is primarily used to measure student learning and presumably to improve student learning. These types of assessment usually involves the measurement of skills and knowledge can offer a period of time based on course content and specific skill practice. Reading assessment itself involves a range of purposes that inflect multiple assessment contexts, standardized referency assessment, classroom-based formative and achievement testing, placement and diagnostic testing, assessment for reading research purposes. Grab 2009 and assessment for learning purposes, Black and William 2006. Number one, perspective reading. Recognition of symbol letter words. Reading aloud, copying, reproduction, writing, multiple choice, recognition, including true, false, and fill in the blank. Picture identification. Number two, selective reading focus on morphology, grammar, lexicon, multiple choice, grammar on vocabulary text, contextualize multiple choice within a short paragraph sentence level, post tags, matching tags, grammar or vocabulary, editing tags, multiple choice, picture, cue tags, as is choose among graphic representation, gap filling text, e.g. sentence completion. Number three, interactive reading discourse level closed text requiring knowledge of discourse reading plus comprehension, question, short answer responses to reading, discourse editing text multiple choice, scanning, reordering, sequences of sentences representing to cards, maps, graphs, diagram. Number four, extensive reading, skimming, summarizing, responding to reading through short essays, note-taking, marginal notes, highlighting, outlining. For example, for the teachers. Number one, the teacher give for example of different types, genres of written language such as memos, newspaper articles, use journals, and menus to students. The teacher asks each student to paper up. The teacher asks each pair's assignment. Student assign example of processing written mature from bottom to top and top to bottom. After that, if the teacher is finished with the assignment, the teacher asks the pair to report their finding to the whole class. That's all for our presentation. Thanks for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.